History of the Corsairs and the Golden Age of the Caribbean. The calling of the sea and the scent of freedom. Imagine the calming touch of quiet waves. Somewhere in the distance echoes the lonely cry of a seagull, and the warm wind carrying the scent of salt and sunlight gently plays with the sails. Night descends over the tropical islands, and stars slowly bloom above the still surface of the Caribbean Sea. I lay in a hammock on the wooden deck of an old ship. The planks moved softly in the rhythm of the ocean's breath. Nearby flickered a lantern. Through the canvas of the sails drifted muted voices, sailors speaking in half-whispers. Once, in these very waters, lived those who chose freedom true, untamed freedom. They ignored kings, laws, borders. Their fleets carved their routes across the sea from Jamaica to the Bahamas, from Cuba to the coasts of South America. Their names spread terror, yet behind sich to live boldly. This is a tale of the age of risen piracy of free spirits who sought not only treasure, but a refuge where one could remain true to oneself, where one could live beyond rules, dissolve into sea mist, and defy the world. Tonight, we drift into that realm, into legend, into memory. There, where the ocean speaks and every wave carries a new story. Close your eyes. Take a slow breath. Let yourself rythmique calme. The Caribbean, before the age of pirates, Spanish galleons and inexhaustible wealth. Before the black flags rose above the Caribbean. Before the laughter of corsairs shook the taverns of Nassau and Port Royal. Another power ruled these waters, Spain. The Caribbean was not a refuge for rebels, but a guarded Eden, a place the rulers of the Old World wished to seize with greedy hands. Armed with maps, crosses, and royal decrees, what drew them here were riches whispered about in the courts of Europe, lands where rivers were, said to glimmer with metal like sunlight. At the heart of this colonial dream stood massive ships with towering, stern castles. There, sails swollen with wind, their cannons thundering in distant ports. These vessels were more than transport. They were the beating heart of Spanish might, carrying gold, silver, gemstones, cacao, tobacco, and countless treasures from the New World back to Europe. The galleons moved across the Caribbean as if over a great game board where every reef, every islet, every storm could become a fatal trap. Their hulls were clad in oak. Their holds were filled to bursting with silver bars from Potosi and bags of golden sand from Central America. There, routes were carefully guarded secrets. Havana became the key to the Old World, the city from which fleets departed for Seville and Cadiz, Spain's greatest ports. Forts and artillery batteries protected Havana from the sea. Watchtowers guarded it from land. On maps of the era, it was marked as the center of all American commerce, a jewel Spain vowed to defend at any price. But abundance breeds envy, and envy is the fiercest storm. Every galleon heavy with treasure left behind, not only a wake, but a trail of rumors. Rumors whispered by English, French, and Dutch privateers, predators watching the shoals of peaceful ships. Early attacks on galleons began as far back as the mid-16th century, long before the golden age of piracy. These were not random robberies, but intentional political strikes sanctioned by rival crowns, aimed at weakening Spain's dominion. Still, Spain ruled unquestioned, for a time. Their navigational charts guarded more tightly than silver held the secrets of the sea. Their captains, skilled mariners, read the stars and skies, sensing weather by the trembling of a sail. Their sailors knew that a voyage was not merely a journey, but a trial under tropical heat, in damp dark decks among barrels of spices, chests of treasure, and dwindling stores of food. The Caribbean was beautiful and merciless. Emerald forests leaned over ivory sands. Coral shoals shimmered beneath calm waters. But beneath the surface lurked constant danger. Indigenous peoples, who lived here long before the Europeans, had already suffered deeply from disease and conflict. Spanish outposts rose among the palms, missions, forts, watchtowers. The Caribbean of that era was like a priceless vessel overflowing with both gold and blood. And while priests whispered prayers on galleon decks, and coins rang in the holds below, shadows began to gather in hidden corners of this paradise, fugitives, outcasts, men hungry not for law but for freedom. Their moment had not yet come, but the ocean already sensed them. Spain, drowning in the wealth of the New World, grew more vulnerable. Treasure, fleets should have strengthened the empire, but instead they attracted thousands of enemies. England, France, and the Netherlands, their crowns burning with jealousy, began sending soldiers and privateers into the Caribbean. The sea became a battlefield for an undeclared, endless war. Spain sans Felipe in Havana, San Marcos in Florida, El Morro in Puerto Rico. But even this was not enough. Treasure increased, and with it the number of eyes watching. The birth of the buccaneers, hunters, outcasts, and the first free people of the sea long before the Jolly Roger fluttered in the Caribbean wanes. Before taverns filled with songs of captured galleons and sunken treasure, there were men who lived between land and sea, neither settlers nor sailors. They were called buccaneers. Their story began not with war or glory, but with a simple fire burning quietly on an island ridge. Over open flames they smoked meat on wooden frames called boucan. The scent drifted across the forests of Hispaniola, attracting wild beasts, hungry travelers, and trouble. The buccaneers were hunters, former sailors, escaped slaves, runaways from European colonies, men who had nowhere else to go. They carved out a life on forgotten shores, living off the land, wandering through mangrove swamps and dense tropical forests. They tanned hides, smoked meat, traded quietly with passing ships. But as Spanish influence grew, the hunters became a threat. Spain claimed the Caribbean as its own empire, treating the sea as a private garden. To the Spanish, these wild men, living freely on land Spain wished to dominate, represented chaos. So Spain tried to drive them out. Settlements were burned. Forests were searched. Hunters were hunted. And something changed. Men who once hunted cattle now began to hunt Spanish soldiers. Those who once sold smoked meat now carried muskets, cutlasses, and long-barreled flintlock guns. Buccaneers moved from the forests to the coasts and then to the decks of stolen ships. They discovered something vital. The sea offered more freedom than any island ever could. And so began the transformation, quiet at first, but unstoppable. Hunters became raiders. Raiders became privateers. Privateers became the first generation of pirates. Their stronghold rose on the island of Tortuga, a place as wild as the men who lived there. Tortuga was small, but perfectly positioned, close to Hispaniola, far from Spanish control, surrounded by hidden coves, reefs, and beaches ideal for ambush. It became the home of outcasts, rebels, and dreamers. A port where no flag held authority except that of the buccaneers. Taverns appeared, frillst, from Trunkstonbrot. Then makeshift shipyards, where carpenters patched hulls of captured vessels. Around the fires at night, plans were whispered for raids, for voyages, for survival. Here, away from kings and laws, the idea of true freedom was born. It was on Tortuga that men realized a captain could be elected, not appointed. Booty could be divided equally, not stolen by nobles. Every sailor had a voice, every voyage a choice. In an era when the world was divided by crowns, ranks, and rigid hierarchies, the buccaneers created something revolutionary, a society where the poor could challenge the mighty. The kings of Europe feared them not only for their muskets, but for their ideas. Meanwhile, Spain tightened its grip on the Caribbean. More forts were built. More soldiers arrived. Treasure fleets grew heavier and more numerous. But the heavier the treasure, the greater the hunger of those who sought it. Soon, from Tortuga, the first great raids would begin, raids that would echo across to continents and change the history of the sea forever. Night after night, beneath lantern light and the whisper of palm fronds, the buccaneers sharpened their blades. Loaded their muskets, waited for the right wind. And the Caribbean, once ruled by a single empire, prepared to witness the rise of a new kind of power untamed, unpredictable, and born of fire and salt. Tortuga, the island of shadows and freedom, Tortuga was not just an island, it was a heartbeat. A pulse in the middle of the Caribbean Sea, steady and rebellious, defying every empire that tried to silence it. By day, the island seemed almost peaceful. Beaches curved like pale crescents, waves rolling onto the sand in slow, hypnotic rhythm. But as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky shifted into deep purple, another Tortuga awakened. The Tortuga whispered about in taverns from Havana to Port Royal. Lanterns flickered to life across the shore, glowing like embers scattered by the wind. Wooden docks creaked under the weight of arriving ships. Voices rose, laughter, shouts, toasts. 100 accents, 1,000 stories. On Tortuga, languages mixed like spilled rum. French, English, Dutch, even Spanish spoken by deserters who turned against their own crown. Here, everyone was equal in hunger, chaos, and ambition. There was no governor strong enough to rule this island. The only law was the law agreed upon by those who carried muskets and sailed under storm-torn sails. And among the many taverns, one stood above the rest, La Vache Noire, the Black Cow. Its walls were patched together from stolen ship planks. Its windows were open holes in the wood, letting in the smell of the sea. Inside, the air was thick with tobacco smoke, spilled ale, and the rough music of drunken sailors tapping knives against tables. This tavern was the heart of Tortuga because it was here that voyages began. A man could walk in a hunter. He could walk out a captain. Maps changed hands under candlelight, drawn on scraps of parchment or stitched onto old cloth. Stories flowed, stories of Spanish treasure, fleets heavy with silver from Peru, gold from Colombia, emeralds from the mountains of Santa Fe. Most stories were rumors. A few were true. And the difference between rumor and truth often led to life or death. Amid all this chaos stood the unofficial leaders of Tortuga, the captains whose names echoed like thunder. Francois Lolonais, the man who feared nothing except peace. Mathurin Desmarest, the patient strategist. The Flies, a Dutch brotherhood of silent killers. And Pierre le Grand, the Spanish galleon with nothing but a small fishing boat and unimaginable courage. Their presence shaped Tortuga not with crowns or laws, but with reputation alone. But Tortuga was more than a refuge for hardened men. It was a sanctuary for anyone broken by the world, escaped slaves, widows seeking a new life, carpenters running from debts, sailors betrayed by their captains, women who refused to bow to the rules written by men. They built tiny homes along the shore, roofs made from palm leaves, walls etched by storms. Children played in the sand, chasing each other between overturned boats. Artists, healers, and storytellers arrived too, because even pirates need legends, and even rebels need songs. On d'abord Valtelai. Every night, the island's heartbeat grew louder, drums from the forest. Tavern, songs drifting into the dark. Distant thunder of cannon fire from ships practicing for the next raid. It felt as if the island itself was preparing, waiting, listening to the winds that carried news of Spanish movements across the Caribbean. For Spain, Tortuga was a plague, a wound in the empire that refused to close. For the buccaneers, it was home, the place where men returned not for rest, but to become more dangerous than before. And soon, the sea around Tortuga would ignite with battles so fierce and daring that even kings in distant Europe would tremble at the reports. But tonight, the island breathed softly. Stars shimmered above like spilled gold dust. Waves whispered against the shore. And in taverns, by candlelight, men traced their fingers along maps, dreaming of islands yet unseen, ships yet captured, and glory waiting beyond the horizon. The age of the buccaneers had begun, and the Caribbean, calm for now, held its breath. The beginning of the hidden war, pirates versus Spain. The Caribbean sea did not become a battleground of human wills overnight. At first, it was simply water-warm, shimmering, indifferent to the fate of ships. But the more gold the galleons carried toward Europe, the louder the sea echoed with whispers of greed, footsteps, and schemes. No empire could hold that many riches without drawing the attention of those who lived in the shadows of its greatness. And so the war began. A war with no declarations, no marching drums, no royal speeches. It was born in a tavern over a mug of rum, in hushed conversations in hidden coves, in the hearts of men who had nothing left to lose, and from such wars legends are born. The first blows Europe's corsairs England, France, and the Netherlands had long dreamed of tearing at Spain's vast dominion. But sending full fleets would provoke an open conflict none were yet prepared for. There was, however, another way, quiet, dirty, convenient. They issued special documents letters of marque, a piece of parchment with a royal seal that granted the bearer permission to attack the ships of the enemy in the interests of the crown. Thus appeared Prévost Alf Criminal, and telling them apart from pirates became nearly impossible. Most didn't even try. One of the first great shadows on Spanish waters was the English sailor Francis Drake, Itar Onishimere coastal cities, storming them like a raging tempest, leaving behind burning walls and defeat. The Spanish called him El Drac, the dragon, a name that made even the most seasoned captains feel a chill crawl down their spine. But Drake was only the prelude. The Caribbean had yet to meet the true giants of the age. The Spanish Empire, a giant, standing on gold Spain, possessed unimaginable wealth. But that wealth became its weakness. The galleons were heavy, slow, stuffed with gold down to the last inch of their holds. So valuable that Spanish captains feared even the slightest deviation from course, even if storms threatened to tear their ships apart. They followed the same routes year after year, the same schedules, like living vaults drifting across the sea. The very path of gold seemed to shout into the world, "Take me." Spanish governors built forts, set cannons, and formed convoys. But the sea was too vast, too unpredictable, and too many men saw in it a chance to change their destiny. And these men were drawing closer every year. Birth of a brotherhood, the buccaneers gather. As a pack they arrived in the Caribbean one by one, hunters from Europe, runaway sailors, adventurers who had lost everything, even men fleeing from the law. But the islands reshaped them all the same. At first they lived as hunters-buccaneers, drying meat on wooden frames, trading hides for powder and rum. But hunting brought only survival, not prosperity. More importantly, every day they watched mighty galleons pass nearby, ships whose holds carried the fortunes of empires. And someone, somewhere, first said aloud what all were thinking: why should we, who know the sea best, settle for scraps? So hunters became sailors, chance meetings became crews, crews became fleets, and fleets became a force no empire could ignore. The first true attacks in the evening mists, under the pearly glow of the moon, fast and agile ships appeared near the Cuban coast, not as mighty as galleons, but swift predatory. Their captains knew every nighttime gust of wind, every hidden rock, every path where Spanish patrols vanished after sunset. And they struck, quietly, suddenly, boldly, like a pack of wolves of the sea. Galleons, once believed invincible, were suddenly vanishing. Spain found burned, empty hulls sometimes, without a single survivor aboard. The gold had disappeared, the silver too. Its path could be traced only by the scars it left on Spanish pride. For the first time, Madrid realized the enemy was already inside their sea. Awakening of the Caribbean, nightmare, but the worst was still ahead. This was only a prelude, only a test of strength, only the first steps of those who would soon become legends. Dark, brilliant, ruthless, yet irresistibly free. Their names had not yet thundered across the world. But the sea already felt their approach. The islands held their breath. Havana mounted new cannons. Cities strengthened their walls. Spain began to panic. And the pirates smiled. Because the real hunting season was just beginning. And in the quiet depths of the Caribbean night, a new era whispered its arrival, one that would change everything. These were smugglers, hunters, traders, thieves, and deserters. Among them, a special place belonged to the buccaneers Europeans. Mostly French-settled islands. At first, they lived by hunting wild cattle and boar, preparing smoked and dried meat. Their name came from the word bacana, wooden rack used for slow smoking. But there, hunting life did not last long. Freedom-loving by nature, armed and hardened by harsh conditions, they soon found another use for their knowledge of the terrain and hidden jungle paths. They began launching sudden attacks on the Spanish. The Spaniards tried relentlessly to drive them from the islands, burning their camps and destroying their shelters, yet the buccaneers always returned. Every act of suppression only steeled their will. Royal authority meant nothing to them. They needed no capital, no king. Gunpowder, rum, and sails were more than enough. And at night, over the Caribbean Sea, Gunshots were heard with growing frequency short, muffled, but powerful enough to make even mighty galleons tremble. Spanish sailors began to fear not only storms, but also the vague silhouettes drifting in the mist before dawn. Uncertainty bred terror. Rumors spread of black ghost ships with no flags, of dead men walking across the water, of traitors hiding among their own crews. These myths wrapped themselves around reality like seaweed around the keel. They shaped a new kind of sailor, no longer a servant of the crown, but a free marauder, bound not by law, but by loyalty to his own brotherhood. This was the beginning of a great shift. The Caribbean, once a calm corridor between colony and metropolis, transformed into an unstable realm of risk and opportunity, where once the flags of kings fluttered proudly, soon rough homemade banners would rise. Where galleons once sailed with measured grace, swift and agile sloops would dart through labyrinths of reefs, escaping any pursuer. And though the first volley of the golden age of piracy had not yet thundered, its arrival was already felt in the air. With each passing year, Spanish galleons became less untouchable, and dreams of easy fortune grew bolder, more desperate. In the holds of those magnificent ships, one could hear not only the clinking of gold, but also the quiet forewarning of an approaching storm, a storm in which the Caribbean would no longer belong to kings, but to those who lived by their own rules. Chapter 2. The Birth of Piracy. Who were the freebooters and buccaneers? At the dawn of the 17th century, the Caribbean sea was like a sun-scorched mirror, reflecting not only the blue of the heavens, but also the ghosts of coming change. The Spanish crown still considered these waters its dominion. On maps, they were marked as part of the empire, and galleons continued their steady voyages between the New World and Europe. Yet, the reality was different. Beyond the reach of Spanish forts, outside the range of cannons and watchtowers, stretched another world, a world ruled not by kings, but by luck, courage, and the favor of the wind. And in this space, on the fringes of the known world, new figures began to emerge, the freebooters and the buccaneers. Their names had not yet entered chronicles, their deeds were not yet sung in ballads. But their presence was already felt like the faint scent of gunpowder carried on the breeze before the first shot. The freebooters came from many lands, French, English, Dutch. Their homeland lay far across the ocean, but it had lost all meaning to them. Many were runaway sailors, former soldiers who deserted their posts, men cast aside by Europe. They did not seek to return, they sought new chances. At first, they sailed as privateers, carrying official letters of marque from their governments, allowing them to plunder enemy ships. England used these most actively. Queen Elizabeth herself approved attacks on Spanish vessels if they benefited the royal treasury. But the line between privateer and pirate grew thinner with each year. When a letter of marque expired or lost its power, no one was eager to lay down their weapons. On the contrary, former privateers continued their raids at their own risk, with no flag, no crown's protection, guided only by one belief: if you are fast enough and brave enough, the sea will bow to you. Meanwhile, on the shores of Haiti and other islands lived the buccaneers, colorful, rugged men who were not pirates in the beginning. Their life was simple and harsh. They lived deep in the jungles, hunting the wild cattle and pigs left behind by early Spanish settlers. They smoked the meat on wooden frames, the bocan from which their name was born. Their homes were crude huts and their clothing was stitched from animal hides. But within these simple men there already burned an unrestrainable spirit of freedom. Over time, the buccaneers began to arm themselves. They were not skilled sailors, but they were exceptional marksmen, seasoned hunters, and survivors capable of enduring the harshest conditions. Their knowledge of the terrain, hidden trails, secluded coves, and dangerous reefs made them invaluable allies to those who operated from the sea. Gradually, the distinctions between land-based and sea-based raiders began to disappear. The freebooters and the buccaneers became brothers in arms. They shared experience, weapons, rum, and soon enough, common goals. Together, they transformed into a force that could no longer be ignored. They formed small bands, armed themselves with rifles, cutlasses, and muskets, and found light, fast vessels. Some seized old Spanish sloops, while others built their own. These ships did not carry gold, but they carried defiance and boldness. Their speed and agility allowed them to strike, vanish, and strike again. Their targets were clear: Spanish ships, settlements, and warehouses. They waged no grand wars, sought no everlasting glory, but they hungered for loot. They needed no palaces, only rum, gunpowder, good sails, gold for ransom, silver in their pockets, and a quiet harbor to hide from the storm. With time, they began establishing bases of their own. The most famous of them became Tortuga, an island shaped like a turtle, which turned into the stronghold of the freebooters. There was no official administration here, but there existed its own order, the law of strength. Tortuga became a magnet, drawing hunters, outlaws, and fugitives. A place where one could buy weapons, sell plunder, or join a crew. Life here obeyed different rules and sometimes no rules at all. On Tortuga emerged the early prototype of what would later be known as the Pirate Brotherhood. Here began the true transformation of scattered hunters and former privateers into a unified, though still informal, force. Ships arrived here, crews gathered here, deals were struck, loot was divided, and nights were spent in wild celebration. And here, a unique code of conduct was forged, unwritten, yet strictly observed. Every crewman knew his share would be divided fairly, that a captain was not a monarch, but an elected leader who could be replaced, that every man had a vote and every man was bound to honor the brotherhood. This spirit of equality, freedom, and honor seemed impossible in monarchical Europe, but here, on an island steeped in the scent of rum, smoke, and liberty, it became real. The raiders did not yet call themselves pirates, but they already carried in their hearts the thing that would one day make them legends. Estimuenton, more as more soldiers. They were drawn not by strict discipline or commands, but by the freedom one could find only in the forgotten coves of the Caribbean Sea, where such men were once rare. Now they formed entire crews. Some deserted their military careers, others fled merchant ships, others simply could no longer live under the authority of the crown. What united them was a shared desire to escape the old order and venture into a realm where laws lost their power. Tortuga became a haven not just for adventurers, but for those who wished to live under their own rules. Among them were Frenchmen, Englishmen, Scots, Dutchmen, a true gathering of nations, languages, and destinies. They did not always understand each other, but they were united by something far greater, the sea, the plunder, and their common hatred of the Spanish. The freebooters who sailed from Tortuga were no longer mere bands of rogues. They were organized units capable of acting precisely, swiftly, and effectively. Their targets were not random. They attacked caravans, weakly defended forts, trading ships. At times, these were lightning raids on coastal warehouses. At other times, sieges of entire towns. The freebooters could wait, gather intelligence, and track their prey. They were not reckless savages. Their success depended on precision and calculation. Their attacks were like lightning strikes, sudden, devastating, and gone before a single shot in reply could be fired. It was during this era that the first true legends arose, captains whose names began to be whispered, mixed with both reverence and fear. Among them was Pierre Legrain, a Frenchman who became famous after, in 1666. With a pitiful crew of only 20 men, he seized a Spanish galleon loaded with gold. His own vessel was old, worn, and poorly armed, yet he approached the enemy silently, rowing through the fog under cover of darkness, and boarded the galleon in a sudden assault. This event shocked even the Spanish. It was the first time a galleon had fallen to such a small but impossibly daring crew. Another notorious figure was Francois L'Olonnais, a man whose cruelty and relentless fury became legend. Escaping from slavery, he led a series of devastating raids on Spanish cities, including the infamous capture of Maracaibo. He acted like an avenger, cold-blooded, calculating, merciless. Rumors spread about him, claiming he tore enemies apart with his bare hands, that he could not be wounded, that bullets simply refused to kill him. His name became a whispered synonym for terror. Every Spanish captain knew that if L'Olonnais' ship appeared on the horizon, all hope of salvation was already gone. But not all freebooters were marked by such savagery. Among them were men who followed a strange kind of honor. They avoided killing without necessity, divided spoils fairly, and before attacking a town, they offered its defenders a chance to surrender. These rules were not always obeyed, of course, but the mere existence of such unwritten principles showed that the pirates of that era were beginning to see themselves not simply as thieves but as representatives of another world. A world where personal choice, bravery, and brotherhood were valued more than titles and uniforms. Tortuga flourished. Not only pirates arrived here, but merchants willing to buy stolen goods. Powder was traded, sails were purchased, crews were recruited. Taverns roared with laughter, rum flowed like a river, dice clattered on wooden tables, and treasure was divided beneath the smoke-darkened rafters. Alliances were forged, betrayals committed. In the shadows of palm trees, the first true history of anarchy was being written, the very one that would later be called the Golden Age. The buccaneers gradually abandoned the land. The life of hunters gave way to the life of sailors. They learned to handle ships, to fire cannons, to storm decks in boarding attacks. At first they undertook small expeditions, but each passing year made their ventures larger, bolder, more ambitious. Soon appeared ships built specifically for pirate needs, light, swift, astonishingly maneuverable. The number of cannons was reduced for greater speed. More hatches and ladders were added for quick access to the hold and the loot within. England and France, still eager to weaken Spanish power, turned a blind eye to the actions of their former subjects. At times they even supported the pirates in secret, supplying weapons, promising amnesty in exchange for service. Thus arose a strange space where the official and the illicit existed side by side. Pirates were useful as long as they brought profit, but they grew less and less dependent on royal permissions. Their strength increased, their flotillas became actual naval forces. They no longer attacked lone ships. They became a threat to entire ports. They besieged cities, dictated their own terms, and could no longer be ignored. Thus, out of gunpowder, rum, desperation, and the glitter of stolen gold coins, true piracy was born, not merely as crime, but as an alternative path, a challenge to the established world order. A realm where the ship was a state, the captain an elected leader, and the brotherhood the only law. The golden age had not yet arrived, but every raid, every captured port, every song sung by a fire on Tortuga drew it nearer, like a rising tide slowly approaching the shore. The sea was ceasing to belong to kings. It was passing into the hands of those bold enough to sail against the wind. Asterisk, asterisk, but it was precisely during this brief period that legends arose and passed through the centuries. The pirates stopped hiding in coves. They acted openly, boldly, spreading terror. They were capable of attacking not only lone ships but entire convoys. They plundered cities, imposed naval blockades on ports, dictated their own terms, and at the same time they formed a distinctive way of life with their own symbols, rituals, speeches, music, and even a kind of ideology. They addressed one another as brother. Their fleets were called brotherhoods, founded not on blood ties but on personal choice. In a world where aristocrats received privileges by birthright, the pirates chose equality. On their ships, the opinion of any crew member carried weight. Before each raid, a gathering was held where they decided who would lead the crew as captain. The leader did not possess unlimited power. He followed the will of the majority. He could be removed through re-election if the crew considered his actions cowardly or unjust. Qui question the course of navigation, the targets of attack, the method of dividing the loot were decided collectively. Such principles stood in stark contrast to the order on state fleets, where an ordinary sailor had no rights. Here, he was a member of the brotherhood. Of course, this fellowship was not always harmonious or ideal. There were betrayals, cruelty, greed. But even under such circumstances, the idea of freedom did not lose its appeal. Here, no one told you who to be. Here, you could remain yourself or become whoever you wished. Every pirate received a share of the loot according to his role. The captain, 1.5 shares. The quartermaster, the same, the rest, 1 share each. If someone lost a hand or a leg in battle, he was paid compensation. It was a primitive form of social protection, where injuries were paid out of the common treasury. No one was abandoned. Everyone knew that if he died, his share would go to his family or comrades. Corsair article, which is in Jittercox, was then the entire crew. These codes of rules could differ, but their foundation remained the same: equality. Order, mutual support, fair distribution. Violation of the code was punished harshly: for theft, marooning on a deserted shore; for treason, execution; for drunkenness during battle, corporal punishment. But these norms turned a pirate ship into an island of order amid chaos. They lived by their own laws, ate what they could secure or capture, drank rum, stuffed their pipes with tobacco, wore colorful clothes, beads, earrings, not out of vanity, but as a mark of their special status. Their appearance was an expression of freedom. No uniforms, no signs of subordination. Scraps of fabric, feathers, cloth braided into hair became symbols not of savagery, but of a deliberate rejection of a world where everything is predetermined. The pirates of the Golden Age operated not only in the Caribbean. They reached the shores of Brazil, attacked cities on the South American continent, crossed the Atlantic Ocean, appeared off the coasts of Africa and even India. In one of the most remarkable episodes, the pirates reached Madagascar and the Red Sea, where they attacked ships of the Mughal Empire returning from the Hajj to Mecca. Their main base, however, remained the same, the Caribbean, where the most important centers were Port Royal in Jamaica and Nassau in the Bahamas. Port Royal was considered the most depraved city on the planet. Taverns, brothels, gambling dens, all operated openly. Even there, à son tortuga, something else when the air, a feeling of existence without chains. The pirates could be cruel, but they were free. They might die tomorrow, but today they sang, drank, divided golden doubloons among themselves, and listened to the roar of the surf beyond the city walls. At this time, at the height of their power, piracy became a significant element of maritime economics. Merchants who publicly condemned pirates often secretly conducted business with them. Colonial administrations, lacking sufficient support from their metropoles, looked the other way at pirate raids if they received a share of the profit. Some pirates, after gaining fame, received royal amnesty and became governors, merchants, respectable citizens, but this was only one side of the coin. Behind every raid, every bar of gold, lay fear, blood, constant tension. And more often, the horizon showed not only merchant ships, but also warships sent to destroy them. The era of freedom was beautiful, but fleeting. Everything born from daring and dreams eventually meets reality. Piracy, having reached its peak at the beginning of the 18th century, began to alarm monarchs and trading companies more and more. Asterisk, asterisk. What had once been tolerated for reasons of political expediency or geographical remoteness had now become an obstacle. The colonies were developing, trade routes were stabilizing, and the empires no longer needed chaos. What only recently had been perceived as heroic adventurism was now classified as a criminal act. Royal fleets began systematic persecution. Privateer detachments were transformed into squadrons dedicated to fighting pirates. Warships entered the harbors of the Caribbean with cannons, soldiers, and orders not to negotiate, but to eliminate. Mass arrests, raids, and executions began. Pirates were offered amnesty, but only once. Accept the king's mercy and live as a subject. Refuse, and you would hang from the yardarm. Some captains accepted forgiveness. They were tired, wealthy, longing for peace. They hid their plunder, bought land, opened taverns. But others, the most defiant, remained loyal to the sea. They eluded naval pursuit, hid in coves, changed their names, disguised their ships. They understood that freedom had a price, and they were willing to pay it to the end. In these final years of the Golden Age, the most famous pirates in history were born and died. Among them was Edward Teach, better known as Blackbeard. His name became the embodiment of terror. He wove slow-burning fuses into his beard, which smoked during battle. his figure emerging from the fog-caused panic. Without firing a single shot, he was more than a captain. He was the embodiment of the very spirit of the Corsairs, bold, independent, unpredictable. In 1718, he fell in battle off the coast of North Carolina. His head was displayed on the bowsprit of the ship, a sign that the era was coming to an end. Another legendary figure was Bartholomew Roberts, also known as Black Bart, with more than 400 attacks to his name. He captured countless ships and operated not only in the Caribbean, but also along the coast of Africa. He wore lace shirts, drank tea from porcelain cups, and maintained strict discipline among his crew. His ship was a true floating fortress. Chapter 4. Treasure Caches and the Marked Map, Truth or Myth? Of all the legends surrounding the age of piracy, the most tantalizing remains the tale of hidden treasures, chests buried in sand, caskets concealed in sea caves, maps marked with trembling crosses beneath which, somewhere among the palm roots or within a rocky crevice, gold lies waiting. Thousands of such stories have survived through the centuries. They were told by campfires, whispered in port taverns, passed from mouth to mouth, and every story began the same way. They say Blackbeard left his treasure on one of the islands of North Carolina. They say that before his death he rasped, "My treasure lies where no one looks, yet everyone yearns to find it." They say Bartholomew Roberts possessed a map divided into 4 fragments, entrusted to 4 loyal comrades. None lived to old age. None revealed its whereabouts. They say, and this whisper drifts like sea mist, but did these treasures truly exist? Pirates indeed captured immense riches: gold, silver, gemstones, spices, fabrics, gunpowder, rum, exotic goods. Yet preserving treasure for long was difficult. There were no banks, no secure vaults. Port cities could fall, ships could sink, comrades could betray. Therefore, pirates divided their loot without delay. After every successful raid, immediate distribution. Everyone received their share and used it as they wished. Some drank it away, some hid it, some spent it on weapons, provisions, women, tobacco. But did they ever bury it? Sometimes, yes. If the crew knew they needed to hide, if patrol ships were on their trail, if there was no time, then they might conceal part of the loot in a secluded bay on an island deep in the forest. But rarely, very rarely, did anyone return for it. And so legends were born. Someone hid their treasure and never came back. The treasure remained, covered by sand, oblivion, and the slow march of time. These stories of hidden wealth became part of pirate mythology, forming the image not only of greedy marauders but of romantic adventurers who left behind not only terror but also hope, the hope of discovering riches. Every new tale of a buried treasure fanned the public's fascination with pirates, creating an atmosphere of mystery and expectation. Thus, in the public imagination, piracy came to be associated not only with violence and robbery, but with quests, adventure, and the dream of freedom and fortune found in the most unpredictable corners of the world. And though many of these stories were pure invention, they endured, passing from one generation to the next as symbols of yearning and the desire for liberty. Some maps indeed existed, drawn on tanned leather, scraps of sailcloth, torn pages of ship logs. Sometimes for personal use, sometimes as a ploy. There were even fake maps that pirates planted on their enemies to distract them or lure them into a trap, asterisk asterisk. But most pirate maps known to us came from literature, from Treasure Island, from adventure novels of the 19th century, where the map with an X became a symbol not of reality, but of a dream. And yet, people still search. Every decade, someone sets out in pursuit of a true pirate treasure with a metal detector, with a shovel, with books, and sometimes with the heart of a boy. For inside each of us lives something that believes. Somewhere, beneath a palm tree lies a chest. Somewhere rests a skeleton with a key. Somewhere, the final riddle is hidden. En Iceland, off the coast of Canada, people have been searching for treasure for more than 200 years. Legend says that something grand is buried there: gold, manuscripts, perhaps even the treasures of the Templars carried away by pirates. Excavations have been made, traps discovered, mysterious objects found, but the treasure itself has never been uncovered. Yet, the search continues, for perhaps the treasure is not gold at all. Perhaps it is the story itself, the process, the anticipation. Thus these tales wander, not across the waves, but through human hearts. Everyone who listens becomes a participant in the quest. Even if you simply lie in bed with your eyes closed and on the edge of sleep imagine yourself holding a map, its corner fluttering in the wind. Before you, beyond the gates of the island, opens a white, silent, forgotten beach, and you take your first step onto it. Sometimes stories of treasure are not merely inventions, but traces left in the earth. On San Andrés Island, near the coast of Nicaragua, old islanders still tell stories of hidden caves where chests were supposedly buried by pirates fleeing the Spanish fleet. Some claim that in their youth they found fragments of chests, rusted locks, and decayed remnants of cloth. Archaeologists treat such tales cautiously, but locals remain convinced. Beneath their feet may lie gold, not mythical, but quite real. In Panama, near the old city, ancient coins are occasionally unearthed, Spanish, French, colonial. It is as though heavy rains wash them out of the earth. Some of these finds are linked to the age of piracy, when ships heavy with plunder anchored off these coasts and hid part of their cargo to avoid losing everything if pursued. Sometimes, discoveries hold even deeper mystery. In 2015, off the coast of Colombia, the remains of the galleon San Jose were found, one of the richest ships in history. Sunk in 1708 after a battle with English vessels. It carried gold, emeralds, and silver worth billions today. And though this is not a pirate treasure in the strict sense, the very idea of a treasure resting on the seabed for centuries, as if awaiting its hour, breathed new life into the myth. People once again spoke of the lost, the forgotten, the hidden, of those who buried and those who searched. There is also a legend of treasures found and then hidden again. Old fishermen in Jamaica sometimes share stories of friends or relatives who once truly stumbled upon a chest or clay vessel filled with silver coins. But instead of announcing the discovery, they divided it in secret, covered their tracks, or even reburied what remained. Because treasure is not only wealth, it is a heavy burden. It draws unwanted attention. It changes people. It turns joy into suspicion. Thus many believe. It is better to dream of a treasure than to possess it. Yet myths continue to live. They are stronger than facts. They require no proof, for they speak not to reason, but to imagination. We love to imagine that somewhere, in a deep cove, in a cave accessible only at a certain hour of the tide, lies a wooden chest bound in iron, its lock crusted with salt and moss. Inside there is not only gold but the breath of the past, letters, rings, amulets, objects once touched by the hands of those who lived in another age, things that do not shout but whisper. The map, marked with an X, is not just an artifact. It is a symbol, a path. It is the thought that somewhere in the world a mystery exists. That amid the ordinary there is something sacred meant only for you. It is a promise. You may find whether it's treasure or something entirely. Sometimes gal butuone self to a relation. This is why stories of treasure lull us to sleep. They let us believe in another dimension, where everything is possible, where you can be a captain, where the night lights your way, where the whisper of the map in your hand guides you through palms, sand, silence. And when you close your eyes, it is as if you hear the wind unfolding a piece of parchment, dry, fragile, darkened by time. Upon it, the outline of an island and a small cross, like the imprint of someone's will, someone's hope, perhaps even your own. For searching is part of human nature, and treasure is not always coins. Sometimes it is a dream, sometimes a memory, sometimes just a moment of silence when you realize you are walking a path where no one has walked before. And beneath every step lies the soft sand of eternity. Chapter 5. The Decline of the Golden Age, War, Betrayal, and the Hunt for Corsairs. Every legend comes to an end. Even one whispered by the sea. Even one fought for not with blades, but with souls. Even if it holds a truth absent in royal decrees. Dusk does not fall suddenly. It stretches on like the stillness before a storm, like a fading melody near a dying fire, like the last cry of a seagull before absolute silence. By the early 1720s, piracy had lost its former allure. The great powers, who for years had looked the other way, no longer needed lawlessness. Colonial trade routes had become stable. The islands were fortified. Chaos was replaced by pragmatism, and what had once been wrapped in the romantic aura of free seas was now seen as a threat that had to be eradicated. England struck first. King George I approved the Act of Grace, a promise of amnesty to all pirates who would voluntarily lay down their arms. It was a calculated move to offer a way out to those who had grown weary of that life. And indeed, hundreds of former buccaneers surrendered. They swore loyalty, handed over their weapons, and pledged never again to sail for plunder. Among them were even the famed captains who once feared no fleet. But exhaustion can be stronger than courage, and the fear of the gallows is a powerful motivator. For those who rejected the offer, true war was declared. The British fleet received a clear order: destroy without negotiation. Ships under royal banners began methodically combing the Caribbean Sea. They knew the coves, the routes, the weaknesses. One by one, the free vessels vanished, flags burned, masts fell silent. On land, arrests began in port towns that had recently been safe havens for pirates. Now gallows rose there. Anyone suspected of aiding corsairs risked ending life in a noose. Public opinion shifted. People who just yesterday sold powder and rum to privateers now handed them over to the authorities for reward. Betrayal became a new form of currency. It could buy forgiveness, guarantee safety, bring silver. Some captains continued to resist. Charles Vane, for example, rejected the amnesty, fled with part of his crew, and tried to live outside the law. Bold and unpredictable, he was soon captured. Taken to Jamaica, he was tried and executed. Gallows were erected right on the shore, in view of passing ships, a warning etched into the horizon. Others, like Bartholomew Roberts, refused to surrender until the very end. He led his crew through dozens of battles, won victories, terrorized ports, and captured countless ships. But fate found him too. Killed in combat with a British warship, his body was buried at sea to prevent legends from forming around it. On land, pirate strongholds, like the one in Nassau, were dismantled. Places where rum once flowed like rivers, where dice clattered and decisions were made by vote, now housed military garrisons. Where once pirates lived by their own code, royal decrees were now read aloud. Life returned under the shadow of law, or, as pirates would say, under the yoke. But the worst was not the cannons or the ropes. The worst was the silence that followed. The brotherhood fell apart. Those who had called you comrade yesterday now fled, hid, or surrendered. The sea, once teeming with unflagged sails, grew empty. Only the wind still hummed old tunes. The last pirate raids were shadows of former storms, small ships hiding among reefs, their crews thin, weary, yet not broken. Sometimes they struck, seizing a merchant vessel, emptying its hold, disappearing into the dark. But such victories were brief. Each one came at a higher cost. Patrols grew sharper, fleets acted faster. Bribes, persuasion, amnesty, and bullets, everything worked against them. Many captains rien simply vanished, disappeared into island interiors, changed their names, started new lives. Some settled in new colonies as farmers or merchants, fallen heroes of another age. Others preserved the old spirit in stories whispered over a bottle of rum by the fire. No one hunted them anymore. People forgot them. History turned its back. Some died in loneliness, without crew, without flag, without a final song. Their remains were found on deserted shores, or not found at all. Their names sank into oblivion, their graves unmarked. But the sea remembered. In every wave, in every evening tide and echo lingered. There were ships. There was freedom. Yet some survived, those who accepted pardon, who found a new path. They lived long lives, sometimes happy ones, though perhaps tinged with quiet longing. For one day, standing on solid ground, hearing the gulls and staring at the horizon, they would remember it wasn't just the battle, not the gold. It was that feeling, standing on deck, wind slashing your face. The sail above unfolding like a wing, and ahead of you, nothing. Only the open sea, only the choice, only freedom. Thus the golden age faded. Not loudly, not at once, but like the tide, slowly, soundlessly. With each passing year, fewer remained who remembered. Fewer songs carried the voices of sailors. More books turned truth into fiction, reality into romance. And there was beauty in that too, for pirates left, but not without a trace. They became legend. Their flags turned into symbols of freedom. Their names into words for the defiant. Their fates into reminders. Even in a world ruled by laws, there will always be those who live otherwise. The memory of them lives not in textbooks, but in the way a person looks toward the horizon, in the way one lies awake at night, in silence, dreaming not of glory, but of the wind, of a distant island. of a life without chains. The era ended, but the legend began. And in that, they found their immortality, conclusion, the memory of the romantic corsairs. Like old legends, continues to live even today. When an entire age comes to an end, only traces remain, traces blurred by the tide, scattered by winds, lost among dusty folios. Yet, sometimes these remnants do not vanish completely. They transform into something greater, into legend, into a dream, into a shadow that follows us. Not to frighten, buteaux romains, pirates. Their ships have decayed, their blades are rusted, their treasures long ago claimed or forgotten. Yet their images live on, sometimes more vividly than the lives of those who obeyed every rule and decree. Why is that? Because pirates are not just a fragment of history. They are a fragment of the human soul. A myth of an endless sea, of a ship sailing toward a place where limits do not exist. A myth of a life without submission, of the right to choose. Of a voice that speaks even when the whole world demands silence. That is why the pirates so quickly moved from chronicles into the pages of literature. Already in the 18th century, the first romantic descriptions appeared. At first, they were depicted as monsters, embodiments of chaos, enemies of civilization. But as time passed, their image changed. Fear gave way to fascination. Their deeds were seen not merely as cruelty, but as defiance. Their boldness, not as evil, but as an expression of freedom. In the 19th century, the true literary epic of piracy began. Novels, dramas, ballads shaped the pirate, not as a simple criminal, but as a rebellious, complex, colorful figure. The pinnacle of this was Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island. From that book came the iconic image known to all, the map with a cross, the dead man's chest, the rum, the wooden leg, the parrot on the shoulder. And though reality seldom looked like this, our imagination accepted it forever. Cinema only strengthened the myth. On the screen, pirates became archetypes, blending rebellion with nobility, humor with danger, loneliness with charm. From Treasure Island to Pirates of the Caribbean, they returned again and again. Sometimes comical, sometimes tragic, but always free. Pirates entered culture not only as characters, but as symbols. The skull and crossbones flag became a sign of independence, of protest, of creative spirit. Musicians use it, artists use it, dreamers use it. It is no longer merely a mark of violence. It has become an emblem of another way of seeing life. The world we live in is built on rules. Yet, within every person there is an island, a quiet place inside where one longs to be simply oneself. Without masks, without ranks, without constraint. And on that inner island, on the private horizon of our imagination, there is always a tiny silhouette of a ship, and someone aboard it who sails not because they are ordered to, but because they choose to. The memory of pirates is not merely a tale of plunder. It is a tale of choice, of those who chose their own path, even when it led straight into the storm. And that is why, when we read about them, listen to their stories, or watch their films, we unfurl a sail inside ourselves. Today, pirates live in books and movies, in games and festivals, but they live in us as well. In everyone who has ever dreamed of breaking free. In everyone who has stood on the threshold of the familiar and wondered, what take the other path, done with no map, no guarant, Gaintian hard compass? Perhaps this is their true legacy. Not gold, not legends, not hidden chests, but the reminder that a person is free, that you can raise a sail even if the whole world says don't, that you can be yourself not because of, but in spite of, that even among storms one may find their own course. The pirates are gone, but their images remain. They have become our mirrors, our dreams, our quiet truth hidden beneath the layers of everyday life. And perhaps that is why this story sounds like a fairy tale, like a lullaby, like a song beside a fire. Not because it is fiction, but because it is us. And when you fall asleep, and the world grows quiet, and everything becomes light and gentle, like the rocking of calm waters. Dito yuerita dinalonlibol. It sways on the mast, the wind moves through the ropes. The sail unfurls, the ship drifts away from the shore, you are aboard. And wherever the course may lead, it is your path. Sleep well, Captain. Thank you for listening. And if somewhere in this tale I made a mistake, forgive me, dear listeners. Even the most devoted storyteller may stumble on a word, if you were carried away by this voyage. Subscribe to like this video to help others find calm, knowledge, and wonder. Comment below. What would you bury in your pirate chest? And remember, the greatest treasures aren't found with a shovel, but with an open heart and a fearless soul. Until next time, fair winds and following seas.